Well, this is our 6th summer working on the replication of Fort Umpqua down here, and it's been about 90% built by volunteers and completely funded through donations and a couple of small private grants. So we've just been chipping away at it for the last 6 years. Like I said, just kind of slowly going as we've had the two to do the project.
Now, at one time, was it really a fort here?
Yes, there was. It wasn't this exact location. It was about a mile upstream and on the other side of the
What years were they?
It was built way back in 1836 by the Hudson's Bay Company.
Uh-huh.
To give you a little
So it was British.
Right. Yes, it was. Because at the time, the Oregon Territory, which actually consisted of Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Western Montana, and present-day British Columbia,
Yes,
was all the Oregon Territory. And it was under what was called a Joint Occupancy Pact, which basically meant that the United States and Great Britain were in a race to see who could get more people here first. And actually, when this fort was built in 1836, since it was pre-Oregon Trail, about 7 years before the Oregon Trail even gets going and settlers started coming into the area, Great Britain was actually winning that race. And when the fort was built out here, it was actually the first permanent white settlement in all of southern Oregon. So it was very, very primitive. They built the fort out here, just like I said, one, to try and claim the area for Great Britain, and then also, since it was right where Elk Creek empties into the Umpqua River, it was a very good trading hub between the Willamette Valley and Umpqua Valleys that natives commonly traveled on, and the fur trapping brigades of the Hudson's Bay Company.
Now, how far along are you in your plans? Are you completed now, or do you have more to go, more to build?
Not quite. We have the entire stockade finished, we have the granary building finished, the barracks finished, and the cooking center, but we still have a captain's house to build.
Okay.
The most men they ever had here was just 13 guys. And one year they only had 3 men living here at the fort. So their job basically was to grow crops, to feed the various fur trapping brigades that would come into the area, and they could also supply them with guns, knives, a lot of whiskey. That was a big trading item back then.
And tobacco?
What's that?
Tobacco?
Yes, tobacco, tea, coffee, basically whatever you would want. And then also in the mid-40s, they did a lot of trading with settlers coming into the area using the Jesse Applegate Trail. And this kind of became the first stop where settlers could come in, they could buy seeds, saplings, equipment, and they could even winter here sometimes. And then when spring would come, they would go out and start their homesteads. And because of that, Fort Umpqua really became the epicenter for settlement of the whole Umpqua Valley. The funny thing is, though, is out of the men who lived here, very few of them were British. Most of them were either French-Canadian or Hawaiian. And of course, they picked up a lot of the French-Canadians coming across the continent, and then a lot of the Hawaiians, they actually had a deal with the governor of Oahu that they would lease out 60 Hawaiians for 3 years, and they would work here in the Pacific Northwest, and after that time they could either be sent home or they could stay out here and start a homestead. And a lot of them chose to stay and settle out here in the Pacific Northwest. But if you want, I can show you inside.
Okay, now the building in back of you is what that we're going to look at?
They called it their granary building, but it's basically their store.
Okay.
They've done all their trading with the natives, the fur trappers, and later on with the settlers coming into it.
And what brought us down here primarily, of course, was a butterfly thing, but this is of great interest to both of us. And this, again, is what is called a granary in the old term, but it was a store.
Right. Yeah, because it kind of doubled as storage and as a store, because obviously back then, you're only getting a few customers a year. So it's not like you're opening up shop and having people coming in through here every day.
Do you want me to pick that up?
Oh, I can get it, thank you. So this kind of doubled as storage and a store.
Do you have a ghost that messes with stuff?
Oh yeah.
Throws it around?
Throws it around, slams the windows and shutters, yeah.
Do you?
Oh yeah. You can see the beaver furs. They were the big money maker at the time. Back in 1836.
That was fur traders.
Right.
Hudson's Bay.
Yeah, matter of fact, the beaver fur, it was 3 times more expensive than any other fur on the market at the time. And the reason why it was so expensive was, you see this fine white hair underneath?
Yes.
And that's all the way through it, kind of like a down. But what they would do is they would shave that off, and they would boil and smash it repeatedly into a felt, and then they would add mercury to it. And then they would put it over a hat mold, and you would have a water-resistant beaver hat. They made top hats, the three-cornered hats in the Revolutionary War were beaver hats. They made cowboy hats, clergyman hats, all sorts of different hats for over 300
Well,
years.
J.B. Stetson still has the triple X and triple X, 4X, and 5X.
Yeah, they're still good hats.
The more X, the more money.
Yeah.
Like about $250 for a good Stetson.
Yeah, thicker and thicker felt. Yeah, but it's kind of cool because it was the beaver that really drove Western expansion. Since the whole fur trade was kind of centered around the beaver, and that's what brought them, of course, further and further west. And as a matter of fact, when the fur trappers first came to the Pacific Northwest, everyone thought that Oregon was just a vast wilderness that couldn't be settled and was only fit for savages, is the way they put it. But when forts like this were built, in Fort Vancouver, Fort Nisqually, Fort George, and other forts, and crops were raised, cattle were herded, everyone out east decided, well, if these rough fur trappers can do it, then we can do it too.
Sure.
And that's what kind of started moving people out this way. You see these white bales?
Yes?
That would have been full of furs back then, called it a fur bale. And believe it or not, using a fur press, they could pack 650 large beaver furs into one of those bales.
And in that day, how many dollars were we looking at?
I heard it's equivalent to what about would be $60,000 today per bale.
Pretty good,
Yeah.
hefty bale.
You're making very good money. Of course, they'd weigh about 100 to 120 pounds.
Yeah, but a guy could still pack that on his back.
Yeah. Back then they even said they'd pack 2 on their back.
That kind of money.
And right over here, if you want to take a look, this is pretty interesting. I can show you how they constructed their outposts. You see, because back then the Hudson's Bay Company, basically, they wanted to do anything they could to turn a little extra profit. And at the time, to get nails...
Things haven't changed much.
No. So to get nails, back then you'd have to bring metal all the way from Europe, and then once you got it here, a blacksmith by hand would have to make each nail individually.
Yeah.
So it cost a lot of money and take a lot of time. So they basically just decided to heck with nails. They threw them out the window and used joints and locks to build their
Yep.
buildings. So you can see here the rafters are dovetailed in. See they
Yep.
pop out just like that. You can see a larger example of a dovetail right over here. That's how we did all of these rafters. The piece it connects into is mortise and tenon. So you've got a mortise cut and a tenon cut. Same mortise and tenon goes into the base, and then all the walls are tongue and groove. They pop out. You can see how that just fits right in there like that. And the incredible thing is, it took just 10 guys 6 months to originally build Fort Umpqua. That's the 3 main buildings, the cook center, the walls, the towers, and that's clearing the land, milling your timber by hand, building, and just day-to-day survival.
And they were working 7 days a week,
7 days a week,
short lunch.
very short lunch, I'm sure. Probably 16-hour days.
You know, believe it or not, part of the apprenticeship program that I went through at Everett was scow building. And that's ocean-going scows, and that's what we used.
Oh, yeah?
Because nails rusted.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's and you know, this building's actually incredibly strong. The inspector said it would probably withstand about a 7.5 earthquake.
Is that right?
Yeah, he said the timbers would crack before they'd come apart at the
That's
joints.
right, yeah.
This would have been the barracks.
The barracks, okay.
You would have slept. You got your cooking center right over here, the little 3-sided cabin. Because back then they did all their cooking outside because A, you didn't want to burn the house down, and B, on a hot day, you don't want all that heat inside.
And smoke.
Right. And then eventually we'll have a captain's house right over here, where the fort commander would have lived with his family. Jean-Baptiste Gagné, who was the commander at the fort for the majority of the time here, he was a French-Canadian, and he married basically an Indian princess, which really helped relations, probably saved his fort at least a couple of times.
I see there's only a watchtower in one corner. Is that any?
There's a watchtower on that corner, and there's also one in the back corner.
Okay,
over here. And you see
okay.
that one actually commands this whole wall and that wall, and then the other one, the
Sure.
other two. It's interesting though, since they didn't have enough men to man the fort full time, they actually kept hounds inside the walls. And whenever people would approach, they would sound the alarm, and then they could run up to the towers and see what was going on. And if they were being attacked, they could fight it off.